All right, we're live. So, welcome to the 92nd installment of the Plain and Win podcast series. It's been a few weeks since I've done one of these, and I've got an awesome guest today. His name is Nicholas, and he has a YouTube channel by the name of Physionic, sorry. How you doing, Nick?
Doing fantastic.
So, I tripped across you because you called in on one of my Unplugged Alpha podcasts once when I was talking about some topics around, I guess, biohacking sort of thing, and I was pleasantly surprised by the depth of your knowledge when you were chiming in on some ideas, and subscribed to your channel, watched a bunch of your stuff. Congratulations on your success. Looks like you've got over 100,000 subs now. This is kind of a part-time gig for you, right?
Yeah, it's a part-time gig at the moment, but once I graduate, I'd like to make it a full-time thing.
Yeah. What are you doing on the day job side of things? Because you've got a list of credentials on the about page of your YouTube channel. You mostly talk about kind of one of the things that I'm super interested on the side that I don't spend too much time on, which is like anti-aging and, you know, dealing with blood labs and studies and all that sort of stuff. And you kind of distill a lot of these studies, but your day job, can you kind of explain to our audience what it is that you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently finishing my PhD in molecular medicine. So I've been doing lab work for the last almost 10 years now. I suppose it's been almost exactly 10 years. So I entered the lab at 24 as kind of an intern, and then just kind of grew from there. Did my master, or did a little bit of undergraduate work where I was still working in the lab, and then I did my master's in exercise physiology, and then from there I now I'm in my final year, final like 8 months or so of my PhD, where, again, for another additional 5 years or so, I've been doing lab work. So that's been my day job up to this point. But Physionic, as you pointed out, Physionic really grew this year substantially to the point where hopefully I can make that kind of follow the rich footsteps in certain regards and be an entrepreneur of sorts.
Yeah, and I want you guys to go subscribe to his channel if you enjoy this podcast. It's linked in the title. You can just click Physionic and it'll take you to his YouTube channel. Yeah, let's talk about YouTube for a minute before we sort of get into your level of expertise. How did you find that? I know it's a grind for most people. Like the vast majority of channels that start up, they never really go anywhere. They'll upload videos, they sort of abandon it after a while. You put a lot of editing into your videos. I can tell by the amount of work that's into the presentation, and the B-roll and all the slides and that sort of stuff that pops up. That must take quite a bit of time. How did you push on through? And like there's times where you would hit upload and publish, and then it would be crickets for the most part. I've said this before, like for a while you'll do that and you hit refresh, and it's like every refresh is your view, or maybe you send it to your mom and she watches it and it's like those are your views. But can you talk about like the startup of the channel and how you push through on that?
Yeah, definitely. I was 24. I just finished my degree in psychology, and then it was after my degree that I realized that I didn't want to do psychology, which was unfortunate for me. But I gravitated towards just wanting to learn. I was obsessed with learning about how the body works, and I kept going to my professors after I went back to school for physiology. And I kept asking them, I was pestering them just constantly. So eventually it just kind of hit me, because I love learning so much. I'm doing so much stuff outside of the classroom. I decided to start a channel and just kind of start posting whatever I was learning. So I told myself every week I had to post a video. And for 9.5 years, I posted one video every single, or at least one video for the last 9.5 years. And like you said, for the last, I think it was 6-7 years, it was absolutely nothing. Which is completely my fault. I should have worked on, tweaking different things, but I was stubborn and young and an idiot. So I just continued to do the same thing and got the same results. And then eventually my stubbornness gave way to my desire to actually want to grow the channel. So I eventually started taking courses. I invested in buying some courses and got some consultations and learned how to grow a YouTube channel. And then it sort of grew for a little bit, about 2 years ago, it was growing a little bit. And then this year it really just took off. I think only because I really started to become a lot more malleable about how I go about things.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like 8 years is a long grind. I see when I sort the channel by age, your 1,000+ subscriber video was 5 years ago. And I think prior to that, you looks like you had like 15 to 20 uploads, and you've certainly grown as a man since then. You've seasoned your look, I can put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were talking about the same stuff back then. It's like, people always go on about how, oh, it must be nice, or, you're probably just an overnight success. Well, this is what an overnight success looks like over 8 years, if you guys want to take a look at it. So, thanks for sharing that, part of your sort of Batman origin story.
Sure.
What does the name Physionic mean? Like, what is?
Yeah, so Physionic is it's a bit of a selfish origin, but it's also based on what I actually study. So my degree is in molecular medicine, but the subtrack that I'm in is in physiology, cell physiology,
Hmm.
and physiology is just it's everything. It's everything related to biology. So it's maybe not. When you take courses, you take anatomy and physiology. I'm not as interested in the anatomy side. So I wanted to learn everything about physiology. It applies to, cancer, cardiovascular disease. I mean, everything that you can possibly think of is physiology. So I just took physio, which is the root word, and then just stuck my name on there, NIC, just stuck it together, and Physionic was born.
Cool. All right. Well, let's get into some of the content and some of the areas of your expertise. I made some notes here and put down some subheadings. Some of these are, I think, going to be of extreme interest to my viewers around, just becoming better versions of themselves overall. I noticed that a lot of the videos in recent uploads have been around anti-aging. It looks like most of your videos are sort of like taking studies, breaking them down, and then summarizing them and making it a little more palatable for the average guy to watch. Why don't we do this? What is sold to the public for the most part that is a hoax that doesn't slow down the aging process?
I think there's quite a few things. Unfortunately, some of them are linked to a popular scientist, Dr. David Sinclair. Although I don't think I don't have any particular specific opinions about him necessarily, but I think that recently people have been asking me about NMN, which is a nicotinamide mononucleotide, and it's a supplement that I don't know. I don't know where the origin came from, other than Dr. David Sinclair. I think he talked about it on the Joe Rogan podcast several years ago.
Yeah.
And I was never that interested in it, but people kept asking me and asking me and asking me about, can you cover this supplement? And I did. I looked over almost every single human study that's been done on the topic, and you can see the full breakdown. It's good over 2 hours long, so it's quite a slog, but if you're interested, you can check it out. And
just to sort of frame it for the audience, if they don't know who he is, this is David Sinclair. I believe he's 52, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he looks great. Admittedly, he looks
great.
He
looks fantastic for his age. Like, hair color, tone, like skin tone, everything. He looks great. So he's a great salesman for the notion of what he's selling. And I'll be perfectly honest. I was taking that for good 6 or 7 months, and I was like, yeah, I don't think this works. And I started looking at some studies, but carry on. Yeah, keep enlightening us on that.
Sure. So ultimately, my conclusion was a lot more subdued than what other people had been talking about. I understand the mechanisms. It does what it's supposed to do in terms from a mechanistic standpoint, but really what we care about is the clinical data, like what are the actual outcomes that happen to humans. And the outcomes have been really lackluster, in my opinion. So I'm not saying that it doesn't have any effect, but I think it has more of an effect for people that really need it. And for the majority of people, especially people who exercise, especially for people who are just generally healthy, even if they don't exercise, but they're generally healthy, it doesn't seem, at least based on the current data, that NMN has much of an effect at all. So which, like I said, it was just a total surprise to me, considering the amount of obsession about that supplement. So that's one. Another one that is also tied to Dr. Sinclair. Again, I'm not necessarily bad mouthing him necessarily, but it's just he's just one of the people that's been talking about a lot. Was resveratrol. That's another one that I haven't done nearly as much of a deep dive into that, but I've heard, and just from the few studies that I've kind of skimmed over, that doesn't seem to be nearly as effective as it was initially claimed as well. Another one that pops to mind is something that I'm currently investigating. So breaking news, I'm gonna have a video releasing on this. Urolithin A is another supplement that people have been asking me about, and it's supposed to. The idea behind it is that it's supposed to improve mitochondrial dysfunction. And I pulled all the human studies on that, and I just finished reading, I think like 80% of them, and again, it's just the data is just so weak. It's like there's maybe a little bit something there, but it's just not going to make a major difference. So I would say those three, and I'm sure if I sat down and really thought about it, I could come up with plenty more.
Yeah, I was real interested in David Sinclair, and I watched quite a few of the podcast interviews that he did. I've got HGH and peptides on my list of stuff to talk to Nicolas about, so we'll get to that in a bit. And I think one of the things that attracted me to it was, the anti-aging, component, which was supposed to deal with things like graying, because my beard's graying, obviously. And it turned out, it didn't do anything, but it turned out that copper tends to be more of a deciding factor with hair pigment color versus NMN. And when I was getting my blood labs pulled, I had my guy throw copper on the list, and it's like, okay, my copper is always low. So I tried supplementing with a copper supplement. My body doesn't absorb that when I'm trying something else. So I just want to see if I can modify this to bring it back to the blonde, like the dirty blonde that I had versus the gray. But yeah, it didn't do jack for me, if I'm being honest. But those are the hoaxes. So which ones actually affect change in our life and slow down the aging process, as you've seen in some studies now that you've analyzed them?
Yeah, so there's a few that have a great amount of evidence behind them. So I'm gonna go through five. I've got some notes here.
Okay.
So I've got five, which is funny actually. When I called in to your podcast, a few months ago, I had written out three of them, and then the caller right before had mentioned two of them,
Yeah.
which really robbed me of my thunder. But anyway, so the first one, which I'm sure a lot of people are really aware of, is creatine.
Yeah.
That one has literally hundreds of studies behind it, and it's incredibly efficacious. I think one area that people don't talk about, though, is that there's new research coming out on creatine specifically for memory and its effects on our brain.
Yeah.
So beyond what we
I've
typically
seen Ben Greenfield talk about that a few times now.
Yeah, so I looked over that literature, and it seems like creatine has a beneficial impact on our nervous system as a whole. So no matter who it is, everybody gets a benefit from creatine on the nervous system. Of course, there's going to be always exceptions, like people that have specific conditions. It might not work, or it may worsen things. But by and large, we're talking about the average person. So creatine has an effect on the nervous system. It has an additive effect on memory in people who are older, so people who are over the age of 65. So that's one supplement. Of course, it also has tremendous effects on our musculature as well. The next one is curcumin, which has a good amount of research behind it. I've been focused mainly on the research on diabetes risk and prediabetes, so preventing prediabetes and preventing diabetes. And curcumin actually has some really powerful effects when it comes to protecting us from diabetes. That said, from that standpoint, it's actually not that effective for people who are already healthy. And I think from an inflammation standpoint, it could have positive effects all around.
Does it affect the C-reactive protein numbers on your blood labs?
Yeah, it does. It has quite an effect on a number of different inflammatory markers.
Do you know
Interleukin-6.
what daily dosage you'd have to take for that?
Yeah, sure. I've got 500 milligrams. Some studies go up to 1,500 milligrams a day.
Yeah. It's not toxic at high dosages anyway, so you could take 500, 1,000. You'd probably be fine.
No, not that I'm aware. And of course, the studies usually I shouldn't say usually, they never use a dose that's going to end up being toxic to people.
Right. What about the creatine monohydrate? What was the dose in the studies for that?
So for women, it's 3 grams. For men, it's 5 grams. I
Mm.
think as more research comes out, there's several studies that have used much higher levels, use 20 grams a day. And I think the reason why is because the penetration. So when we consume creatine, our body stops producing creatine. I know the first question that comes to people's minds is, well, then is that a good
Really?
thing? Yeah,
I thought we got creatine from meats, from organ meats, or from tissues. No.
we do that. We do that as well. Yeah,
Okay.
that's absolutely true.
But our bodies can manufacture it too.
Yeah, our
Okay.
liver and our kidneys send molecules back and forth to one another that ultimately create creatine. Then that gets absorbed within our musculature and obviously the other tissues as well.
Okay.
And actually, our brain has its own unique creatine production system. And that's actually why a few studies have used 20 grams, is because they think that to saturate the brain with creatine, you have to consume more than the typical muscle-centric 5 grams. So that's been the idea, but that hasn't actually been verified yet. So as it stands, the studies that I've seen have shown an effect at 5 grams. If there's an additive, an even better effect at 20 grams, I don't know that yet, and nobody does.
Okay.
The next one is fish oil. So 800 milligrams to about a gram specifically. So what I focused on for fish oil was to look at the effects that it has on the brain. So protective effects also on memory and our ability to learn language, and just like overall plasticity, neuroplasticity of the brain. And specifically focusing on DHA over EPA. Not to say that EPA doesn't have positive effects, but our brain has much higher. I think it's like 90% DHA and much less EPA. So focus in the studies, therefore, focused a lot more on DHA, and they tended to find more of an effect if people focused on DHA consumption.
So, do you know who the author of Estrogeneration is? Dr. Anthony J.
No, but I've heard you speak about him, I think.
I've had him on my channel twice, and I've used him to analyze my DNA, which is something I'll get to in a minute when I get to my other talking points. But he did mention that when he was in school, they were analyzing the chemistry and the makeup of human brains, and I think it was an outrageous number. Something like 80 or 90% of the human brain is basically DHA. So fish oils are like not just a building block, but it's necessary for your brain to operate. In his estimation, I'm guessing that you would say the same.
Absolutely.
Is there a source of fish oil that you'd recommend? Because I mean, the problem with fish in the sea that I came across is mercury content. There's a time when I was consuming loads and loads of tuna, and my mercury levels went through the roof when I was doing my blood labs. And the doctor's like, "Well, what have you been eating?" I said, "Well, I've been eating a lot of tuna because my trainer wanted me to up my protein, and I wanted a convenient way. So I would go to Costco and get these frozen tuna poke packs, and I was legit eating like 2 packs of these tunas per day for about 4 weeks." And my mercury level went through the roof. He's like, "It's an old fish. Old fish in the sea have shitloads of mercury and metals in it and stuff like that." So is there a source of fish oil that you'd recommend, or even krill oil? Like, is there one that's better than the other based on what you've studied?
No, I don't. I don't know that much about different brands, but what I can say is, if you go to Consumer Labs, I don't know if you remember there, but it's really cheap subscription. They actually do all the independent testing, so they actually have a lab where they do all the independent testing, and
Okay.
they check for mercury in all the fish oils that they.
So all
They
the
try.
products are on the shelf. If you have a membership, then it'll tell you and it'll rank it, sort of thing.
Yeah, they'll rank it. I mean, they test, I don't know, like maybe 30 different brands. They test them every like few years just to make sure that they're staying up to standard. They check for mercury, check for arsenic, they check for a bunch of different things, and then they'll give you like 3 recommendations for what they think would be beneficial.
Okay. So I'll have to look into that. So that's 1, 2, 3. What's number 4?
Glynac, which is actually the one that I had mentioned to you at one point.
What was
So
Glynac again?
it was glycine plus N-acetylcysteine.
Yeah.
So
Glycine plus NAC. Yeah.
yeah. So Glynac, the studies on Glynac have been really impressive, just genuinely impressive, from a really great research group out of Baylor School of Medicine. And I was blown away, and that's actually one of the videos that did really well on my channel. Just because going over the literature was just metric after metric after metric improved with Glynac supplementation. But the reason why I say but is because I think that Glynac is probably only going to be effective for people who are a little bit older. So all the studies were done in people that were in their 70s, and they saw a tremendous benefit. So again, kind of like the creatine situation with memory, I think that Glynac is probably going to be most beneficial for people in their 60s and 70s and beyond.
What sort of benefits were 70-year-olds getting from it?
Oh, massive. It was all over. So they did some biochemical measures of mitochondrial function. They experienced betterment in mitochondrial function, which translates to better ability to use fat for metabolism. So they experienced a betterment in their ability to use fat, which also translates typically to better insulin sensitivity, which they also found in really dramatic effects. They found better grip strength, muscle performance in general, in muscle endurance, and that's just like a small subset of the things that they tested. There are only a few things that didn't improve, like I think like triglycerides and cholesterol or something like that. But most of the measures that they looked at really did improve substantially.
What were the dosages, and at what time of the day did they dose them? Do you know?
So the time of the day, they just took it with meals, if I remember correctly, just to avoid an upset stomach, mainly because it's extremely acidic. But the dosages that they used were absolutely astronomical. They were like something like 6 grams, I want to say 7 grams for each. And there have been some other studies that have used NAC or N-acetylcysteine at lower dosages and seen positive effects. So what I've been trending towards, what I told my dad at least, and my grandparents, is that probably aiming for a smaller dose is probably going to be fine, because we don't actually know. We only have 3 studies on the topic. And although they're fantastic studies, we don't actually have like an upper limit or a lower limit. It's possible that we could get all these benefits from 1 gram a day. We just don't know. So, and the other thing with Glynac is that because it's one research group, and as any scientist would say, you kind of want to see it replicated. That said, it's not, some random lab in the middle of nowhere. It's a pretty reputable lab. So
what's the, are there any side effects to it? Any damage to organs? Any, does it tax your kidney values or anything? Or was it just totally fine throughout?
Yeah, there was one concerning trend with Glynac. I say somewhat concerning because, well, I'll get to it. So the one concerning trend was that there was an increase in ALT, which is an enzyme that's found in your liver. And if you start seeing a lot of that expressed or released, I should say, in the bloodstream, that's typically a sign that you're experiencing some level of liver toxicity. However, the rise was the actual delta. So from before taking Glynac to after taking Glynac, over, I think, several months, like 4 or 6 months, something like that, was really small. And additionally, they did other liver enzymes that did not change. So, it's just one metric, and the other metrics that would kind of have to go along with it didn't change. It wasn't anything that really caused for concern. So I'm keeping my eye on it, but it's, as it stands, it's not like it shot straight up and people were turning yellow or anything like that.
Okay, so glycine and NAC. I do remember you mentioning, I take that anyway, but I haven't thought about passing it on to my parents because they're elderly now. And, it's like muscles are wasting. They're getting tired all the time. So if it's got that much of an opportunity to improve their quality of life, then I'm definitely going to get them some. Rizzo, to your question here, I'm a member. Can't ask a question. Am I blocked? I haven't blocked you. If I block you, then you can't comment. I'm not really sure why you can't ask a question if you're logged into your account. You should be able to. If you want, here, I'll open up my Twitter. And if you want to DM me on Twitter what your question is, then I'll present it to Nicolas that way. Maybe that'll be a way to get it to him if YouTube's not working. Okay, and then number 5?
Number 5, I've got collagen peptides. So I was going
to ask you about collagen. Okay.
Yeah. So I haven't looked at collagen peptides from a joint perspective, but I've looked at it from a skin perspective. And the research, I think I went over almost 20 studies on the topic, and the research is a little dicey. There's some, I guess I'll put it this way, there's a mixture of studies. Some studies are absolute crap, and other studies are decently well done. So my meter, if this is the middle, is leaning towards it's beneficial. So I take 5 to 10 grams a day, and I think that's probably applicable to anyone.
And the benefits are in joint health, skin health, hair health, nail health, like all that stuff.
Yeah, I've specifically looked at skin health, so I know for a fact skin health, but the idea is that it also affects joint health as well, hair health for sure, absolutely.
Mm. Yeah, I actually take quite a bit of collagen now because I make my own protein pudding out of my beef protein product and a collagen product that I have.
Mhm.
And I don't really like drinking the shakes. They kind of taste too foamy. So what I do is I sort of blend them up, refrigerate them, and because it's got collagen, it turns into like a Jello pudding. So it's really good. So I'll smash 1 or 2 of those a day. So I'm taking quite a bit of that. So that's good.
Mhm.
All right. So collagen peptides. Let's go to workout and recovery. What
Okay.
have you learned in that area? Because I know that you train, like you lift. So
Yeah, I've been training for what has it been, 15 years now, nonstop. It's it's incredibly important. So I have a lot to say on this, but I'll keep it as brief as I can. Um, when it comes to training, there's a few fundamental things that people have to do if they want to take advantage. And you're probably already doing all of them, but for anybody listening, um, one is that you have to constantly be progressively overloading. You have to be improving in some form or fashion, if that's by the number of repetitions that you perform, the actual resistance itself, your rest times, whatever it ends up being, just picking a metric and then trying to improve from exercise to exercise. So progressive overload is probably one of the highest tenets that you should always keep in mind. The second one is definitely not going to be new to anyone, is going to be lifting compound movements. So we're talking about like a deadlift, squat, bench press, overhead press, pull-ups, things of that nature, just multi-joint, as long as you're not doing dumbbell curls or tricep extensions or whatever. There's nothing wrong with those exercises, but for anybody first starting out or even an intermediate lifter, they should definitely be focused a lot more on compound lifting. And the next one is volume is the greatest driver of hypertrophy. So intensity, when I mean by intensity, what I mean by volume, let me explain that real quick. So intensity is just literally the amount of weight that you're lifting. So the amount of resistance that's on the end of the bar or at the end of the cable or whatever. Volume is the actual amount of total work done given a certain amount of time. So let's say if it's within a day, so if you go to the gym and you lift 5,000 pounds total for the day, or you lift 1,000 pounds for your chest, whatever it might be. Or you can extend it to per week or per month or however you want to do it. Doesn't matter. The point is that you're lifting a certain amount of weight and it has to be over a certain amount of time. And you can use that as a metric. So let's say month 1, you were only able to lift 8,000 pounds. The next month you were able to lift 9,000 pounds, et cetera, et cetera. Now there's an intersect between those two in that you can't be doing volume that's just junk volume. So you have to be putting in enough resistance on the musculature where you are actually stimulating muscle growth. Now, what does enough resistance mean? It's that the science has become really clear on this over the last 10, 15 years, that the intensity doesn't matter nearly as much as getting close enough to failure. So what I mean by failure is that you literally just can't lift the weight anymore. So you would want to, let's say if your failure reps would be, let's say you can do 12 repetitions of a certain amount of weight. if you can get within like up to like 10 or 11 repetitions, just a few reps shy, that's definitely a good enough intensity that you will see improvements in muscle growth over time, as long as you continue to increase the volume over time. So
thought here. Okay, so I've got a squat rack in my basement. I've been going down every 60 to 90 minutes throughout my workday, and I'll just go do some squats. So if I'm pushing, let's say 8,000 pounds last month, but in 2 or 3 months, I'm moving 15,000 pounds, but I'm not lifting any more weight, or maybe even doing lighter weight. For example, you're saying that as long as I'm stressing the stressing the muscle and moving volume of weight, then that's going to net a better outcome than compound lifts or progressive overloading.
No, it would still have to be compound lifts, and it would still have to be progressive overload, but the progressive overload can come through added volume.
Okay.
So because it's again, the progressive overload is just, am I improving from 1 week to the next or 1 month to the next? So in that scenario, you are improving from that month to the next. How you do it doesn't really matter, as long as you're getting just sufficient intensity and your volume is continuing to rise. That's again specific to muscle growth, which it's not a perfect correlation with muscle strength. Like, yes, while the muscle size increases, the muscle strength increases as well. But I'm sure you've seen people that are pretty skinny. They don't have a ton of muscle on them. They're not like these super jacked guys, but they can lift a lot of weight. The reason for that is because they're focusing on strength or power output, which is far more intensity based as opposed to volume based. So you can mix and match these variables, but I know that a lot of people are interested in kind of gaining a little bit of both at the same time, which focusing on volume and then also pairing that with a decent enough intensity where you're, getting within about 3 to 4 reps or closer to failure offers the best bang for your buck.
Okay, so that's awesome. Any hoaxes or anything that we've been lied to when it comes to workout, recovery, building muscle? It's a total waste of our time.
Yeah, well, there's it seems like an unending list, it feels like.
What are the big ones that pop to mind right now?
Well, for example, confusing the musculature, like confusing the muscles, that's just total BS. Your muscles don't get confused. They don't have brains.
What do you mean by confusing them? Is that like doing different movements for the same muscle? Like, for example, you can do cable, like rope pull downs, and then do skull crushers to hit the triceps in a different way. Like, is that what you mean by confusing the muscle?
Yeah, I think, again, I don't believe in it, so you'd have to talk to somebody who actually really believes in it, but which I think now is becoming fewer and fewer people, or maybe I'm just ignoring them. I don't know, but I think the principle is, you're doing one exercise. Let's say 1 week you're doing skull crushers, then the next week you're doing tricep pull down, but you're constantly moving between those two exercises without actually prioritizing, am I improving in these exercises? It's just about mixing it up as much as possible. Oh, I didn't get sore, so from this exercise, now I have to move on to another exercise. No, you should still be doing that exercise. You should just be continuously trying to improve. And it's fine to switch exercises, absolutely. But just, again, make sure that you're improving. So
are there any studies or anything that you've come across that make any recommendations for taking breaks on workouts? Because I've noticed, like, if you ever have to take a break for a month or something like that, and you go back and you do your first workout, you have like immense amount of soreness and like a positive feeling, from that workout. Is that something that they've studied?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been studied a lot. So the differences between deload and just a complete break, the studies are pretty clear on that as well. So it's typically recommended to do a deload, which means that you would be cutting your volume at least in half, and you'd be cutting your intensity at least in half. So you're essentially just going in there and just doing movement. You're not even like really, you're lifting the same weight.
So it's a lightweight for like a month or something.
Yeah, it's super easy. I think the deloads are typically supposed to be 1 to 2 weeks. But honestly, if you were to extend it further, the point is that if you're at least moving the musculature, you have a much higher ability to retain that musculature, even if it's, let's say, a month.
Wow, interesting. Okay, well, I hope you guys are getting value from this. If you are, make sure you hit the like button and show a little love, and subscribe to his channel too. Let's go to sexual performance. Is that something that you studied? Have you come across any research papers on that?
A little bit. I haven't studied this nearly as much, but I have a few notes for that as well. So one is, you've mentioned this in a number of your videos, but if you can't see your Johnson, then that's a big problem.
I know what you're going to say.
Yeah. Yeah. So
if you get out of the shower and you look down and you can't see Johnson, you got a problem, boys.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Lose that weight.
So reducing body fat is a huge one, mainly because obesity and just being overweight has tremendous effects on your vasculature. So we think about body fat, but honestly has a tremendous effect on your vasculature as well. So blood flow can't get to the areas that it needs to. The second thing is resistance training. So while we talk about testosterone, for example, resistance training is an excellent source of pumping up your testosterone as a whole. Typically, resistance training individually, when you do a session, your testosterone spikes and then it comes right back down within about 30 minutes. But overall, just the fact that you have to put on muscle and maintain that musculature, that ultimately has a tremendous effect on your overall testosterone levels, which testosterone free, unbound testosterone has tremendous effects on like erectile dysfunction, has sexual or libido, all that stuff. So resistance training is a huge one. And then for the people that don't want to do either one of those, obviously I don't recommend that at all, but the other one that I've read one study on this, and I planned on doing a lot more on this, but I just haven't gotten around to it, is there's a supplement called red Korean ginseng, which this one study found that this was in, I think, men in their 40s or 50s, something like that. And they took red Korean ginseng and ultimately found that they had better sexual performance, not like massive differences, but relatively, like, let's say, a moderate effect. Also, erectile dysfunction was dramatically reduced, not completely eliminated, but certainly better.
What was the pathway that the red Korean ginseng worked through? Was it nitric oxide, or was it something else?
Yeah, so they had a few different suggestions. One of them is you're exactly right. So it has effects independent of testosterone. It actually increases nitric oxide, which gets released by the endothelial cells. Those then bind to the smooth muscle cells within our vasculature, specifically around the penis in this situation. And then it opens up the vasculature so that you can actually have an erection or have better vascular flow to the brain as well. And then the other one that they surmised was that ginseng also binds the actual molecule or a molecule, I should say, that's found in ginseng, also binds to what are known as GABA receptors. So GABA is an anxiety related neurotransmitter. And they don't exactly know if that is one of the main mechanisms, but they do know that it has an effect through that. So I think there's a lot more research that needs to be done on the topic, but it's something.
Did they compare it to something like L-arginine and what's the other one? Carnitine, I think, which are probably the most relied on now for nitric oxide boosting properties.
No, they didn't. Not in that study. Again, unfortunately, I've only looked at that one study, so it's something I need to look into more.
Okay. Was there anything else in that category that's worth talking about, or is that it?
No, that's all I've got.
Okay. Let's do testosterone. That's always a hot topic. Optimizing testosterone naturally. What works? What doesn't work? What have you seen in studies there?
Yeah. Okay. So there's this one supplement that, again, a lot of people have talked about, or at least it was popular maybe a year ago, called Tongkat Ali. That I looked at every single study on Tongkat Ali. along with a meta-analysis, which is a grouping of all the studies together. And I had some severe criticisms of those studies for reasons that I won't go into here. But ultimately, my conclusion was that if you are deficient in testosterone, again, context matters with all these situations, just like we've talked about with creatine, curcumin, Glycine, all that stuff. But context really matters. So Tongkat Ali seems to be potentially beneficial for people that have lower testosterone. There's a slight bump up in their testosterone levels, again, based off of limited data. However, if you're in the normal testosterone range, which actually extends pretty low down, we're talking about I think 300 nanograms per deciliter, something like that, and upwards, Tongkat Ali seems to have basically no effect. And there's also a study that looked at resistance training compared to Tongkat Ali, and resistance training increased testosterone just as much, if not a little bit more, than Tongkat Ali. And then they actually combined them to see, okay, well, what would happen if we combine both of them? Had no effect. So resistance training was a far more potent way to increase testosterone.
Did they specifically test a specific type of resistance training, like heavy compound movements, like squatting, for example, versus bicep curls, or was it just resistance training in general?
Yeah, so typically the researchers will focus more on compound lifts. Every once in a while, you have researchers that don't really know what they're doing when it comes to that stuff. They should probably talk to an exercise physiologist or a personal trainer or something, or just a doctorate in physical exercise. But most studies focus on compound lifts, and I believe these studies did focus on, I think it was like the squat and the bench press or something like that.
I think I came across something when I was a lot younger. What the hell was his name? Tom Platz. He was known for his enormous, ridiculously clown-like quads. He had massive legs. And one of the things he was saying that he used to do intense sprinting, like not 200 yards, 100, but 50, just 100% power and then just stopping. And he cited a study. I never looked it up or try to find it, so I don't know if this is true or not, but apparently they studied this where you do explosive sprinting, and that's supposed to improve your testosterone production. Have you seen anything like that?
I haven't looked into those studies, but I would bet money that it's probably true. I mean, high intensity interval training of that sort, high intensity interval training comes in all kinds of different forms. You can have, as you described, going, maybe 100 meters, 200 meters, but you can have even shorter, like Tabata, for example, as an example, where they do really, really short bursts. And it's kind of like a halfway point between endurance exercise and resistance training. So it's an excellent source of getting that combination.
What do you think of Fedosia agrestis? I think that was popularized by Huberman. He was talking about it a few times, and apparently it's got some positive properties, but I've also heard that it's somewhat toxic if you use it over a longer period of time.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I have no idea. I haven't looked at those studies at all.
Tribulus, do you have any take on that?
No, another one that I haven't looked into. No.
Okay. Anything else around optimizing testosterone that you've come across that might be worth mentioning or that's useful?
Well, I can definitely say that most testosterone boosters, not all of them, but most of them, at least kind of commercially available ones, don't tend to do much at all. So I think it just depends on the ingredients that they use. Again, it's something that I have to look into far more. But in terms of optimizing testosterone, you've even discussed them in your videos multiple times. Like, get enough sleep, make sure that you're resistance training, lower your body fat. All those have
zinc, vitamin D, K.
Absolutely, yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah, those are all the foundational stuff that you want to sort of deal with. I tell guys to start tracking this stuff. I reckon by the time you're about 30, you should be doing this on an annual basis, getting a full blood panel, including all your hormones. So it's as you kind of age, you start to look for patterns. And if there's a pattern of the declining, like a systematic declining levels in your hormones or changes that aren't favorable, then you could contemplate things like TRT and stuff like that. But I mean, there are things that you can do, and I've already mentioned that a million times. There's lots of videos on my channel where I talk about sleep and optimizing sleep and ways to fix that. Okay, we talked about NMM, Sinclair. Peptides. Somebody brought up peptides earlier too. HGH and peptides. I saw a video on your channel before we were talking where there was an anti-aging stack that proved very promising, which I think included HGH, zinc, DHEA, metformin. I think those were the main compounds, was it?
Yeah, zinc, metformin, HGH,
DHEA.
DHEA, and vitamin D, I think, was the other one.
Yeah, vitamin D was like 3,000 IU, which is a very low dose still.
Yeah.
So actually, let's talk about that then, because that's kind of an anti-aging stack that you haven't mentioned yet. So
Sure.
Has your position changed on that at all? Because it sounded like you were pretty favorable on that stack and the outcome of that study.
Yeah. So what we're talking about is the TRIM study, which came out in 2019, I want to say, something like that, maybe 2016. So TRIIM. So the main objective of the study was to try to reverse what's known as thymic involution. So you have a thymus, which is an organ that's highly involved, or a gland that's highly involved in your immune system. And when we go from a kid all the way, throughout our lives, our thymus starts to go through a process called involution, where it becomes fat. So it goes from the actual tissue, the thymic tissue, where you have the exchange of different molecules for your T cells. That's why they're called T cells, thymic, where you have this excitation of the T cells, and then the T cells can then mature and defend your body. Well, as we get older, that thymus gets fattier and fattier and fattier, and then around the age of 60, 65, it goes super rapid. It's like within a year or two, the rest of it just turns straight to fat. So what these researchers wanted to do is like, okay, well, if we give this stack that we have some suspicion is going to have some positive effects, what's going to happen? And they gave this stack to a really small sample of individuals, all in their 60s. And what they were able to do is actually they found that they were able to reverse this process. So they were able to make the thymus go from fat back to its thymic situation of the actual gland itself, which is crazy cool. I mean, and from a biological perspective, to be able, because if you're going from fat back to lean tissue, the actual thymus, that means that the cells in that area have to essentially reverse, because fat tissue is actual fat cells with fat molecules in them. So that was one thing that they did. The other thing that they did, which was really fascinating, is that they looked at a number of different epigenetic clocks, which is becoming more and more popular as more research is coming out on them. They're not perfect, but they're an interesting and cool instrument to measure chronological age versus biological age. And what they found is that just from, I forgot exactly how long the study was, but
is this one on the telomeres?
It could tell. Well, no, it's not. It's not on telomeres, but it could tell you a little bit of information on telomeres as well. So what they found is that when these people were taking this HGH, or the stack in general, that they saw I believe it was 6.5 year reversal of age. So, and this was only after, again, a number of weeks. I can't remember exactly how long it was, maybe 8 weeks, 12 weeks, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that got them really excited. And it was so well handled, actually, that they're doing a new study called the TRIM-X study, which is now with more individuals. And I think that's going to be published at the end of 2024. I think the end of next year is when the results of that are going to be coming out.
Remind us again. So the stack was DHEA 50 milligrams, vitamin D 3,000 IU, metformin 500 milligrams. Yep. HGH was based on body weight, I think it was. Do you know what that was? It was like 0.0125 or something like that.
Yeah, it's like 0.015 or something like that. But I can't remember the units, and that it's going to be a drastic consequences if we get the units wrong.
It's in Nick's video. You can go to his channel and search for it, because there was 5 though. I've got 4 on my list. Was there a 5th one?
Yeah, there was. Which ones did you have? DHEA,
DHEA, vitamin D, metformin, HGH,
zinc was
zinc.
the
That
other
was
one.
the other one, which is
50
50
milligrams a day.
milligrams a day. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Which,
the idea behind that was so the DHEA was actually there to control the negative effects of HGH, because obviously if you just take HGH,
yeah.
there are some potentially negative effects like insulin, IGF, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So they have DHEA there to control that, but they also have metformin there to control the other aspect of insulin sensitivity. So those two probably aren't going to actually do anything for the actual age reversal effects. It's the HGH itself plus vitamin D and zinc.
So zinc is cheap. Vitamin D is cheap. DHEA is cheap. You can get all this shit in the States. If you're in Canada, you can't get DHEA. You have to have a prescription for it. Metformin, you need a script for it. There's an alternative to metformin. It's a plant-based one. What the hell is it called? It's
Berberine.
berberine. That's it.
Yeah.
Is berberine just as effective as metformin in your opinion?
I think it's a little less effective, but I think that the drawbacks of it, I think, are a little bit less as well. So
Okay.
I need to look into it more. I've skimmed a few studies, but it seems promising.
Yeah, and then you've got HGH, which is expensive as fuck.
Yeah.
If you're going to inject it, it's funny though, because my doctor checks my labs, and when I first started using them, like 6 or 8 months in, he added human growth hormone to the blood panel. It's an expensive test, so he's like, yeah, I'll just check it like once a year, and he checked it, and then I went and sat down with him, and he accused me of using HGH. He's like, are you getting something from somewhere because your levels are real high? Like, what's going on? I'm like, no, I don't. So we sort of talked about it and did some Googling, and it turns out like lifting heavy shit and putting it down actually helps your body produce more growth hormone. So free version of that, pick up heavy shit and put it down. Heavy compound movements it worked for me. So I'm not saying it's going to work for you, but DHEA, vitamin D, zinc, and berberine you can get easily from wherever you want, and you're going to have to turn up your body's ability to make HGH by picking up heavy stuff and putting it down would be my recommendation.
Yeah.
Let's talk about peptides, because somebody brought up peptides. They brought up HGH, which we've just dealt with. So what's your opinion on peptides? Have you seen any studies on that stuff?
Yeah, a little bit. I haven't looked into this too much either. Again, I keep saying that, but as a one-man operation, it's tough to go over all this stuff. So I've looked at BPC 157 a little bit.
I've used that. I found that it was very helpful.
Yeah, so I haven't looked at any human trials on that, but I went over a review, and they mentioned several positive effects in preclinical trials. Specifically, it has tremendous effects on angiogenesis, so the actual birth of new blood vessels.
Yeah.
So that wherever you end up placing it, the blood vessels end up migrating to that area, so you get better blood flow, and which, of course, for recovery is an absolute godsend.
Yeah. I use it to fix my knee. It's not impossible to get. It's not like you can walk in your Walmart and buy it. You have to get it from one of these websites, and sometimes you have to pay with e-transfer, Bitcoin, or whatever. But there's videos out there that show you how to use it. It works. It's worked on me. It helped me out tremendously. There's lots of other peptides. TB500. There's epitalin. Have you seen anything on any of the other peptides?
No, I haven't.
What do you think about that new fat loss injectable that's like all the rage right now, semaglutide or something like that? What's it called? Manjorin, I think, is the pharmaceutical brand. Have you seen anything on that? I've heard people say that, yeah, you do you get lighter, but you're also getting fatter at the same time. It's like you lose muscle mass, but you're also losing weight too.
Yeah, I'm actually I've read 10 studies on this. This is one of my other videos that's going to be coming out soon. So I've looked at this from every angle, its effects on inflammation, weight loss, fat loss, diabetes, all kinds of different areas. So there's a number of them. There's Wegovy, Ozempic, I forgot the one that you mentioned, but that's also a popular one. And those are the common names for like liraglutide and semaglutide and all those, kind of fancy terms. So they all have different levels of effectiveness, but I will say they're extremely effective at weight loss, at fighting off diabetes, at reducing inflammation. And I don't think that they specifically, I don't think it's a direct mechanism like you take this and then suddenly it has a direct effect on inflammation. I think that
It
people
doesn't seem like
lose
it's the
weight.
drug that does it. It seems like it's the fasting that improves, like the
Yep.
autophagy that like improves your chemistry and your organ health and all that, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that
Yeah.
I think the reason is because you take the molecule, it affects your satiety, and then you stop eating nearly as much, and then
Mhm.
that's what actually has a tremendous effect. Now, in terms of if it makes you lose weight, but fatter and whatnot, so like the skinny fat kind of condition,
Mhm.
I looked, I haven't run across any literature on that, but I've heard from, for example, Dr. Peter Attia. I think
Atia said it. That's right. Yeah.
yeah, he had mentioned that. And that's actually what turned me on to like, oh, I need to look into this. I'm going to still look for some other studies for that, because I'd like to see actual body composition changes, because the studies that I've looked at have just looked at weight loss, just
Mhm.
straight weight loss. So they haven't actually like distinguished between those. But I think that they're a net good for people who genuinely have serious trouble losing weight. But do I think that everybody should be using them? No, absolutely not. I think that, of course, every other method, resistance training, losing fat through nutrition, using supplements like that, I think that's going to have tremendous, way, way better results than this could ever have.
Talk about cancer and starving it away. I've seen you cover that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a tricky topic. That's a topic that I need to humble myself, to be honest with you, because I actually got reached out to by the researcher that's like the number one person on this very topic,
Mhm.
and I'd like to do a podcast with him, but I need to figure out exactly how I'm going to do it, because I need to be really responsible with it. So to talk about a little bit, the idea is that there's this small group of researchers that believe that cancer actually arises from mitochondrial dysfunction. So that you have defunct mitochondria where they can't oxidize fat. They can't use fat for energy.
Mhm.
So they rely on this process called the Warburg effect, which a lot of people know about that are, kind of a little bit aware of this process, where your cells use glucose, they use sugar for energy production. And the idea is that if cells end up having this dysfunctional mitochondria plus the Warburg effect, then they become cancerous. They become more cancerous, and there's some evidence for that phenomenon. However, the bulk of the research it follows the somatic theory, which is the idea that if you have mutations that occur to the genes, then that's what actually leads to cancer. So it's kind of a debate back and forth. I mean, the somatic theory has way, way more researchers behind it. But, I still find it interesting, the idea of being able to metabolically affect cancer. I do think that that's possible. I think a lot of researchers would agree, but I think that they would also say, and even this researcher who's like the number one on this topic, he even acknowledges that you have to use particular drugs to dampen. So I guess to real quick explain this, if the cancer cells are using glucose, the idea a lot of people have is, okay, well, then I'll just stop eating sugar. I'll stop eating carbohydrates, go straight ketogenic, and therefore then I'll kill all the cancer. The problem with that is that cancer cells are really devious. They have, it's not a, it's a really tricky disease to treat. And doing that may be one way, but the problem is that cancer cells adapt by starting to use another metabolic pathway called glutaminylosis. It's kind of a jumbled word, but they're taking glutamine, which is an amino acid, and using that for energy production. And and we can't stop consuming glutamine. Plus, our body's going to end up having to use it as well. So or we produce it. So what cancer researchers are trying to do is try to knock down glutamine in the body through drugs and then put people on a ketogenic diet. And there's some evidence that that does work. However, The reason why I'm being extremely cautious is, one, because I haven't looked at nearly enough literature to be able to say one is better than the other. But the other aspect is the fact that um, it's there's some cancers that actually thrive on fat. So imagine if you're a person who thinks that that's the case, that if I just cut out carbohydrates, I switch to fat, you have potentially just supercharged the cancer that you were trying to eliminate because you had this belief. And so it's very heterogeneous. It really depends on which type of cancer that you're talking about. There's so many variables. It's a really tricky area.
Yeah, it's a complex one then. Okay. You know what a lot of guys get hung up on is height, and I've heard some mumbling about influencing growth in the teen years with a certain cocktail. Is this anything that you've ever come across?
Not something I've come across, but from a physiological standpoint, that would make some sense. I mean, your growth, once your growth plates, if your growth plates are still open, where they haven't turned to a different tissue, then I suppose it would be possible. But
Okay.
that's just from a theoretical perspective, mechanistic standpoint.
Are there any specific blood markers or labs that you would recommend people should look at or check on a regular basis that they may not be aware of or sitting in their blind spot?
Yeah. In the blind spot, maybe not. Well, I guess I do have a few. I think looking at inflammatory markers can be beneficial at times too, like looking at not the actual cells. So a lot of blood tests will look at, like a CBC, will look at your white blood cells, leukocytes, macrophage, all that stuff. But what costs extra is to look at like interleukin 6, interleukin 1 beta, TNF alpha, like those kinds of, these are molecules that get secreted by your body. And if you have really high levels of these, they have wide reaching effects. They have direct effects on insulin sensitivity. They have direct effects on blood pressure, on your inflammation, your immune system, how it's reacting to things. So
Are these somehow influenced or tied to C-reactive protein or homocysteine or any of those things?
yeah, so C-reactive protein is a far more, especially high sensitive HS. C-reactive protein is a lot more of a global measure, as in it's I believe it's secreted by the liver, and it's a global measure of inflammation, but it doesn't quite get at the crux of certain inflammatory profiles, like these other inflammation molecules called cytokines get released from the cells, because those are directly, or almost, they're typically associated with the actual immune cells themselves secreting these molecules, as opposed to C-reactive protein, which would be a tissue.
And why is it important for people to track the inflammatory markers in their body?
Well, inflammation tracks with, it's basically, I don't want to say it's a prerequisite, but it tracks. I'll just say it correlates extremely well with almost every disease known to man. I mean, obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancer. I mean, just name it. The answer is yes.
So any dis-ease in your body is going to show up, or it's going to, like the leading indicator you're saying is going to be a spike in your inflammatory markers.
Yeah, not even a spike. I mean, a spike probably wouldn't be that concerning, but if you saw elevated levels and then, 6 months later they're still
Over a longer
elevated,
period of time, yeah.
There's something going on there that, maybe you don't have disease yet, but you're fast tracking your way there. Yeah, and I think another metric that people sleep on, which is far better than looking at blood sugar, is to look at HbA1c. So you can do that like once a year, and that's a super precise marker of blood sugar, insulin sensitivity, and all of that stuff. So that's
HbA1c.
Yeah, right.
I think I had that on my last test. I'm just going to check it as I'm asking you the next question.
Sure.
Best types of protein. Have you seen any studies done on that as far as absorption, use for muscle growth or anything like that?
Yeah, I've done a lot of reading on this. So the best type of protein there's a number of options actually. When it comes to post-exercise, let's say, let's say we'll call it exercise. So anywhere around the exercise window, focusing on whey protein, which is obviously the fast digesting. It's high in leucine content. It has all the amino acids that you might need. But additionally, if you didn't want to do whey protein, if you wanted to stick to, avoiding supplements, you could certainly do any sort of whole meat, if that's chicken, if that's beef, whatever it is, or eggs. And then pre-sleep is another area that a lot of people miss. Pre-sleep, you actually don't want to be consuming whey protein. You want to be consuming its cousin, which is casein protein. Because casein protein, the digestion profile for whey protein is just straight up and then straight back down. So it gets digested and taken up extremely quickly. But casein protein takes 4 to 5 hours for it to climb over time. Now, the problem with casein protein is you typically have to consume more of it to get to that muscle protein synthesis peak.
Mm-hmm.
So you typically want to consume 40 to 50 grams of casein protein before sleep, as opposed to whey protein, where you can top out, especially if you're in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, at 20 to 30 grams of whey protein.
Whey, the source is milk. Casein, the source is egg, if I remember correctly, right?
I think they're both milk, actually, but don't quote me on that. You might be right.
Okay. Yeah, I used to. When I was really into bodybuilding in my 20s, I was fastidious about it, man. I would have my casein protein shake in the middle, not in the middle of the night, but before I would go to bed, and yeah, that was supposed to tie you over until the morning.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's that. And I guess before we wrap up, I want to ask you about things like DNA analysis. Do you have any experience or seen any studies on that, or do you know much about it?
Yeah, well, DNA analysis is a huge part of the field. Absolutely. I don't know. I haven't looked into any of the personal ones that people use nowadays, but I imagine that they follow the exact same formula as what we use in the lab. So, yeah, it's incredibly popular.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. So it's hemoglobin A1C, HbA1c. Is that right?
That's right. Yep. That's it.
Okay. Markers are good for that. Cool. All right. So, dude, we've covered a lot. I hope you guys got some value out of this podcast. Nick's got a great channel. Awesome dude. Very well versed. Looks like he's going big places. He's probably going to be the next Andrew Huberman if he keeps going at this rate. So I wish you all the best in your career and your channel and what you're doing. Do you want to give people anywhere where they can find you aside from your YouTube channel, or just make that the starting point?
No, that's it. I mean, go there if you're impressed, cool, and if not, then leave a hate comment, and I'll ban you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for watching, guys. Throw a comment below. Do all that stuff and the likes. Quick reminder: the second edition of my book is available on Friday. It's been updated, and you can pre-order now. The link will be in the description. And if you're on my email list, I sent you an email about it earlier this week, but check that out. Thanks again, Nick. We'll see